Right, hello there. So this is the first of the sort of car review videos I'm going to be doing, and the first car I'm going to look at is the Stirling GT, which is this one here. So this car is a sports classic. It's quite pricey. I believe it costs $975,000 from Legendary Motorsport. Yeah, here it is, $975,000. It's based on a car called the Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing, which is sort of like a 1950s Mercedes, which is quite nice. It's called the Gullwing because of the doors it features. If I just show you this a minute, you'll notice the upward lifting Gullwing doors, which look like wings, which is quite nice. So that's a bit of a background on the car and sort of pricing of it. As you may have just heard, the car sounds pretty throaty. I do like how it sounds. Now, looking at how I've done my one here, I've tried to model mine on the original sort of 300 SL. I've painted it in like a silver metal sort of colour. I've put some custom wheels on it. I decided not to go with the white walls because I thought that was a bit overboard for this car. Spoilt it a bit. I've gone for some chrome wheels because they're nice and shiny. And I've left a lot of things stock, but I'll show you that a bit later on. So, getting into what this car's like. First of all, how useful is it in a race? Well, I've used it in a couple of races, and this car overall, I would say in the Sports Classic division, I reckon this is the best car you can get in that class. The main reason is just how balanced and sort of how good the traction is. It doesn't matter what corner you're going round, it's just a very easy car to drive. Turning circle is very good. If it goes into a slide like that, it's very easy to recover as well. And usually it doesn't slide, but if you want it to, it can. If you really want to push it around the corner, you can just give it that little bit like that just then. A little bit of slide just to get round. So that's quite useful. I love the sound of this car. I think it sounds fantastic. It sounds very sort of deep and throaty, a bit like the Casco, but not quite as rough. So yeah, in races I think it's very good. The acceleration's quite impressive. The handling's the most impressive part. The top speed is good. It's a little bit weaker compared to the Z-Type. So if you're on a race with a lot of straights, then the Z-Type is still probably going to beat this if it's driven correctly. But overall, this is your best car for races, I would say, in the Sports Classic category. In terms of its usefulness in free mode, I would say it's a nice car for cruising around in, definitely. It's also a very nice car for bringing to sort of car meetups if you're into doing that sort of thing. I think it's quite resistant to damage. I mean, if you crash, I mean, I'll just demonstrate it. You can see that head-on collision there has not really affected it very much. Yeah, and also if it does get damaged, it doesn't really affect the steering so much either. So it's quite a damage-resistant car. It takes impact very well. It doesn't knock you too far off course. It's quite quick. It's very stable. It's good for getting you around fast in free mode. The only downside is, as with a lot of other cars on this game, is obviously you've only got 2 seats, so there are some situations where it might not be the most useful car. But overall, in both of those aspects, for races and for free mode, this is a very good car. So races, I give it a 10 out of 10 rating, simply because there is nothing else in the Sports Classic category that drives as well as this overall. The Z-Type's got a lot of understeer. The Coquette Classic, although it is very good in terms of acceleration and top speed, it's quite a difficult car to handle, and then a lot of the others are just underpowered. So this is my new favourite for races, just mainly for its traction and its stability. For free mode, I'd give it a 9 out of 10 rating. It's not the fastest car to get around in, but it is fast enough. It looks pretty cool. People tend to notice it straight away if you're driving around in it. It's quite damage resistant. The only downside is, obviously, if you want to carry other people around, you are limited just to 2 seats. So that covers those aspects. I'm now going to head to the customs and just show you what modifications are available. Now what I will show you as well is that there are quite a few things I've decided not to do to this car. If I'd chosen to style this car differently, I might have done them. But because I wanted to keep it fairly original, and I wanted to base it on the original sort of silver, shiny sort of 300 SL as a bit of a car fanatic, I didn't really want to do too much to it. I've gone for red neons, and I'll explain why in a minute. It was sort of to compensate for something else which I couldn't do, but I'll show you. So with this car, there's quite a few options available, and it really does depend on what you want to do with it, you know, what you want from this car. I chose to keep it fairly sort of classic looking. Now, as well as the standard sort of stuff, if we look at bumpers, there's only one option for this, and people who do this are going to be people who want to make this look more like a street sort of tuned car. So you can get rid of this, it says rear bumper delete, you can get rid of the rear sort of chrome bumper here, which makes it look a bit more rounded at the back, and I half thought about doing it, but for some reason if you want a classic look it does spoil it. If I was to paint this in like a more radical colour though, if I had, I don't know, lime green or ultra blue or red or something like that, and I put some sports wheels on it, you know, really striking looking spokes, and I tried to make it look more modern, I would probably do this, because then it'd make it look like a street tuned car, but that's not what I wanted to do, so I chose to leave the bumper on myself. The exhausts is another thing which I decided to leave as stock. If you look at these stock exhausts, they're quite sort of, these side exhausts are quite sort of big, and then they look pretty good, you know, there's nothing wrong with them. Titanium exhausts are a bit smaller, and they're also a bit crooked when they come out of that side, so I wasn't actually as pleased with those as I was with the stock ones, so I decided not to go for those. The other option is these race exhausts, which are sort of slightly burned or rusted, and they've got this blue tip effect at the end. However, again, unless you wanted to sort of race prep this car, there's no point in doing that, in my opinion, because it just spoils the classic look, so I decided to leave those as stock for mine. But, you know, as I said, if you want to do a different thing with this car, you can make it look quite good. And then also there's options to put lights on the grille, sort of rally lamps, so you can go for single lamps, well, I say single lamps, 2 lamps or twin lamps, or you can go for 4 lamps like this. I half thought about not doing, because that's technically the most original looking, but I thought that even though this wasn't necessarily the right thing to do, I still thought it looked good, so I decided to put those on anyway. And they actually do turn on as well. If you're driving around at night and you press the right directional button, they will turn on as well as the normal lights. That's quite a nice feature. The hood, you can go for a carbon version of the hood, which if you wanted to contrast it with certain colours is a good idea, I suppose, but for what I was doing, again, not the best choice. So I decided to leave mine as stock and just paint it as the same as the rest of the body. What else have we got? Oh yeah, the roll cage option is probably quite hard to see, but you can see if I just put it back to stock, there's no roll cage in there. If you look through the front window, you can fit a roll cage, but there's also the option of doing this roll cage and some sort of rally tape across the headlights. Now again, for what I was doing, it spoils the look. If you're wanting to make it look like a rally sort of touring car sort of thing, then yeah, I suppose you could, but I mean, it looks okay from the front, I guess, but it annoyed me because from the sides you can see sort of tape sticking out, but you can't see the lights, and for some reason that gets on my nerves, so I decided not to. Right, I don't know why this is put in this category. It's put with the spoiler category, which I think is really stupid, but you can do this. You can put a spare wheel on the back. Now, straight away, the combination of that rally tape, which you can choose sort of on the headlights, and this spare wheel suggests to me that you're supposed to make it look like some sort of old-fashioned rally car, perhaps, you know, if you change the wheels as well. I can sort of see the attraction of that, but I'd rather keep it classic myself. You know, if someone could quite easily whack the spare wheel on, take the rear bumper off, put the tape on and the roll cage and everything, and the race exhaust, and make it look quite sporty, but for me it just wasn't what this car was meant for. I just wanted to make it look more like the original sort of thing. But yeah, there's that option, but I'm not really that keen on that, to be quite honest with you. It spoils the sort of nice curvy look of the back. So I think that's as far as it goes in the way of sort of visual options specific to this car. So as I mentioned earlier, for anyone who's interested, I decided to paint this using one of the metal colours. So I chose the I think it's the brushed aluminium. Yeah, brushed aluminium. There were some other options. I mean, these ones. I was going to choose this, but I thought it's not really quite bright enough. Do bear in mind though that when you get out of the customs, whatever the colour appears to be inside the customs, it's usually slightly brighter when you get outside because of the light. So I mean, that was definitely too dark, but I decided to go with this. And something worth pointing out at this point, I guess, is that if you don't change the hood to carbon, then you can actually paint that a different secondary colour as well. And you'll also notice that also changes the colour of the roll cage, which is quite a nice feature. There's one thing I was slightly disappointed with this car, I guess, but it's not something that's been on other cars, so it wasn't a surprise. I would have liked to have been able to change the interior colour to red, purely because if I was modelling it against the original 300SL, the silver body colour with the red interior is the classic colour, and I'd have loved to have been able to do that. The closest I could get would have been to change sort of the roll cage to red, just to have that similar sort of effect, I guess, but the problem I've got then is that it also changes the hood colour. So yeah, I decided not to do that. I would have liked to have done, but I decided not to. So yeah, I mean, overall I'm quite pleased with how I managed to get this car, so that's why I compensated. I used the red neons to sort of compensate for the lack of red in the interior, just to give that sort of hint. And I thought that if I was going to put neons on at all, I thought red was a good colour to choose. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this car. It's quite, if I was to give my overall verdict on it, I'd say probably, I don't really know. I'd say probably, I'd give it a 10 actually. I'd give it a 10 out of 10. There are a couple of disappointing things, but nothing that I'm surprised by. It's a good car for races. It's a nice car to drive around in. It looks good, it drives well, it sounds good. If I was to give a verdict and say whether it's worth the money it costs, like with the other sports classics, it's one of those situations where it is, but only if you want it enough. However, what I will say is that if you're wanting to have an advantage in terms of owning a certain sports classic for races, then yes, it is worth it. If you're just wanting it as a car for the sake of having, if you liked it enough, it'd be worth it. If not, possibly not, because it is quite a stretch. Having said that, it's not as ridiculously priced as things like the T20 and the Osiris, which, although they are obviously a different category of car, they are very expensive, and I do think that is quite excessive, you know. This is priced slightly more expensive than the Z-Type, which is $950,000, but I do think that this is more worthwhile compared to some of the other cars and their prices. So my verdict, is it worth buying? Yes, that's my opinion. It just depends whether you like this car enough. If you're in a race though, it's going to be good for you. And you'll notice, in just as a quick point, in the interior you've got the yellow yellow line on the steering wheel, which is for, it's like a racing sort of background type thing, like for central, when you wheels sort of central, it sort of shows you when the line's on the top, so that's all that's for. But quite a basic looking interior on this car. I don't really drive an interior view much, but for anyone who does, that's sort of point that out. So overall, very good car, very pleased with it. Would I recommend it? Yes. And I will see you in the next one.